This is the story of a mother who gave everything, only to be cast aside by the very children she loved most. Left with nothing, she chose to rebuild, planting seeds of kindness, hope, and strength. My dear, your feedback means so much to me. Please let me know where you're watching from and whether you enjoyed this story. It's truly, truly important to me. Thank you so much. The house is too quiet now. I sit by the window watching the world pass me by and wonder how it all came to this. How the people I gave everything to, my time, my love, my strength, could turn their backs on me as if I were nothing but an old coat to be discarded when worn and torn. I am 72 years old, my name is Evelyn, and my heart carries the weight of 1,000 disappointments. I raised my children alone after my husband passed. I worked double shifts, cleaned other people's homes, cooked their meals, watched their babies. Also, my own children could have a chance at a better life. I missed my own meals to feed them, missed my own dreams so they could chase theirs, and for what? They visit only when they want something, a loan, a favor, a place to stay when the rent is due and the landlord's knocking at their door, and when I've given all I can, when I say I have nothing left to give, they leave. Calls unanswered, messages ignored. There was a time when I believed that love would be enough, that if I gave all of myself, held nothing back, my children would see me, not just as the one who cooked and cleaned, who stayed up late sewing patches on their clothes or helped them with schoolwork when my eyes burned from fatigue, but as a person worthy of their respect, their loyalty. But somewhere along the way, my love became invisible to them. My sacrifices turned into expectations. What I once gave freely, they began to demand, and when I couldn't give more, they acted as if I had failed them. I remember the first time I said no to my daughter, Lorna. She stood on my porch, tears in her eyes, asking for money to cover her bills, but I had none left. I had given what I could, and the rest had gone to the mortgage, the light bill, the medication that kept my tired heart beating. She looked at me as if I were a stranger, as if all the times I held her through nightmares, stayed up with her when she was sick, worked double shifts to buy her school shoes, as if none of that mattered now. She left without a word, and from that day, the phone calls stopped, the visits stopped. My son, Ronald, wasn't much different. He came when he needed a hand, a place to stay after another bad decision, a meal to fill his belly when pride kept him from asking anyone else. But when I asked for his help, to lift something too heavy, to fix the leak under the sink, to just sit with me so the house didn't feel so empty, he always had somewhere else to be. I sit now in this chair, worn thin from the years, and I think, where did I go wrong? Was it loving them too much, giving too easily, or was it thinking that my love alone could shield them from becoming what they have become? Users, takers, people who see me only as what I can provide? The hardest part isn't the loneliness. It isn't even the betrayal. It's the memory of who we used to be, the laughter, the hugs, the dreams we dreamed together. It's knowing that somewhere along the way we lost all of that, and I am left here with my quiet house, my aching heart, and the hope, fragile, foolish perhaps, that one day they will remember. One day they will see me again, not as a burden, but as the mother who gave them everything. But I'm not waiting anymore. I've waited too long. It's time I see myself. It's time I remember that I am more than what they took from me. The days pass slowly in this house that once overflowed with noise, with laughter, with the chaos of family life. Now it is filled only with echoes. Echoes of footsteps that no longer fall, voices that no longer call my name, memories that linger like shadows in the corners of each room. I walk from window to window, looking out at a world that seems to have moved on without me. The neighbors' children ride their bikes down the street. The mailman tips his hat as he passes, though I rarely have mail anymore. And I think, once my home was a place where people came, where life happened. Now, it feels like a monument to everything I've lost. But I am not as weak as they think I am. Lorna, Ronald, they may have turned away, but I have not forgotten who I am. I am the woman who held this family together after their father died. The woman who learned how to fix a leaky roof, how to balance the books, how to stretch $1 so that 2 children never felt the hunger that kept me awake at night. I am that woman still. And though the years have taken my strength, though my heart is tired, I know I have more left in me than they ever imagined. I've started writing things down, not because I think they'll ever read it. No, I've let go of that hope, but because I need to remember. I need to remind myself of the truth, that I mattered, that what I did mattered, that love, even when it is taken for granted, even when it is repaid with silence or scorn, is still love, and that means something. Some nights I sit on the porch and let the cool air wash over me. I look up at the stars and talk to their father. I tell him what's become of our babies, how I tried so hard, and how I failed, or maybe how they failed. I don't know anymore, but I know this: I am still here, and I am done waiting for them to see me. It's time I see myself. The nights are the hardest. When the world outside quiets, when the wind rattles the old windows and the clock ticks loud in the silence, that's when the memories come. I see Ronald as a boy, his arms wrapped tight around my neck after his first day of school, his tears wetting my blouse as he whispered, "Don't let me go, Mama." I see Lorna on her wedding day looking back at me as she walked down the aisle, her eyes bright with excitement and fear, and the way my heart swelled with pride. How did we get here? I've asked myself that question 1,000 times. Maybe it was too many yeses when I should have said no. Maybe it was covering for them, making their lives too easy, giving too much without teaching them what it means to earn. Maybe I thought my love could build a wall strong enough to keep out the world's harm. And in doing so, I kept them from growing strong enough to stand on their own. Now, they visit only when they want something. And when I have nothing left to give, they vanish, leaving behind the hollow ache of absence where love used to live. But I am done measuring my worth by what they take. I am done letting their absence define my days. I have started planting again. Small pots on the windowsill, seeds that sprout and reach for the sun. I tend them like I once tended my children, but this time I expect nothing in return. And as the green shoots unfurl, I feel something in me unfurl too. A quiet reminder that life goes on, that I go on. One of the neighbors, a kind young woman named Tasha, noticed the plants one day and stopped to ask about them. We talked. Simple words at first, but enough to remind me that kindness still exists in the world, even when it doesn't come from where you expect. And in that small, unexpected moment, I felt the first true hope I'd known in years. The friendship with Tasha grew slowly, like the plants on my windowsill. She would stop by on her way home from work, sometimes bringing tea, sometimes just her easy smile. We talked about small things at first, the weather, the garden, the neighborhood. But in time, I found myself sharing pieces of my story. The good parts first, my children's first steps, their graduations, the way they used to light up a room with their laughter, and then, little by little, I let the harder truths slip out. The silence that grew between us over the years, the way they drifted further each time I tried to pull them closer, the visits that became requests, the requests that became demands until I was no longer a mother in their eyes, but a means to an end. Tasha listened without judgment. She never offered empty words or easy answers. She just sat with me, present, kind, reminding me with her very being that I was not invisible. It was she who encouraged me to take the first steps beyond my porch. "You've given so much to others," she said one afternoon. "Maybe it's time to give something to yourself." Her words stayed with me long after she left. That evening, as the sun set in a blaze of color, I stood at my front door, hand on the railing, and stepped down onto the path. My legs were unsteady, but my heart felt stronger than it had in years. I walked to the end of my garden, where the last of the day's light touched the earth, and I breathed in the promise of that moment. I knew the journey ahead would not be easy. There would be days when the loneliness returned, when the memories hurt, but I also knew that I had truly begun, to reclaim myself. And for the first time in a long time, I felt ready for what came next. The first few days after I stepped beyond the safety of my porch felt like crossing into another world. Every crack in the sidewalk, every rustle of wind through the trees, every face I passed on the street reminded me that life had gone on without me, but also that I still had a place in it if I chose to claim it. I began small. Morning walks to the corner and back, short conversations with neighbors I'd once known well but from whom I'd drifted, hidden behind my closed doors and drawn curtains. Each greeting, each smile offered and returned, felt like laying a brick in the foundation of a new life. Tasha was a steady presence. She encouraged me without pushing, always offering a hand or a kind word when I doubted myself. Together we tended the small garden that had begun on my windowsill, now spreading to pots on the porch, then to patches of earth along the walkway. The plants thrived, and so, in a quiet way, did I. I started volunteering at the community center. At first, just sorting donated clothes, preparing meals in the kitchen, but soon I found myself sitting with the women who, like me, had felt forgotten. I listened to their stories and they listened to mine. In those exchanges, I discovered something precious. I was not alone in my pain, and together we began to heal. I wrote more in my journal, not about Lorna and Ronald, not anymore. My pages filled instead with hopes, with small victories, with gratitude for each day I woke to the promise of another chance. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, I was ready to meet it. The garden became my refuge, a living testament to what could be nurtured, even after long neglect. Each morning, I would rise with the sun and step outside to greet the day, my hands sinking into the soil, my heart steadying with the rhythm of planting, watering, tending. Flowers I'd never dared hope would bloom now unfolded their petals beneath my care. Herbs and vegetables thrived, their scents mingling with the fresh morning air. People began to notice. Neighbors paused as they passed, offering compliments, asking questions. Some brought seedlings, others left small notes of encouragement. The connections I thought I had lost began to weave themselves back into my days, delicate at first, but strengthening with each act of kindness exchanged. Tasha often joined me in the garden, her laughter lightening the air. Together we planned new beds, shared tea on the porch, spoke of hopes and plans. She spoke of returning to school, of starting a business. I listened, inspired by her courage, reminded that new beginnings were possible at any age, in any season of life. At the community center, I found purpose. I helped with literacy classes, mentored young mothers, shared the recipes that had once filled my home with warmth. The women I met there taught me as much as I taught them, about resilience, about forgiveness, about the quiet power of showing up for one another. I no longer waited for calls that never came, for footsteps that would not return. My heart still carried the ache of what I'd lost, but it was no longer a weight that kept me from moving forward. It was a reminder of where I had been, of who I had become, of all that I still had to give. And each night, as I stood at the edge of my garden, watching the stars appear one by one, I whispered a simple promise to myself. I will not waste another day waiting for others to see my worth. I see it now, and that is enough. As the weeks passed, my steps grew stronger, my spirit lighter. The quiet confidence that had once filled me as a young woman, before grief, before disappointment, began to return. Not in grand gestures or sweeping changes, but in the steady, daily acts of rebuilding my life. I took on more at the community center, helping organize events, leading small workshops, and cooking and gardening. Women who had arrived there lost and uncertain began to find their footing, just as I had. We shared more than recipes or gardening tips. We shared strength, the kind that comes from surviving heartbreak and choosing to hope anyway. Tasha and I often spoke about the future. She dreamed of opening a small cafe, a place filled with laughter and warmth, where everyone was welcome. And I dreamed, too, of expanding the garden into the empty lots nearby, of creating a space where children could play, where neighbors could gather, where life could blossom in the cracks left by sorrow. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in soft pinks and golds, I stood at the edge of my garden and felt at peace. The ache for Ronald and Lorna was still there, but it no longer defined me. They were part of my story, but no longer the end of it. I breathed in the scent of the earth, the flowers, the promise of all that I had yet to do, and in that moment, I knew I had not been discarded. I had been set free. The first time I walked beyond my block felt like a journey across a vast new world. The streets I had once known felt unfamiliar, as if they too had changed while I was hidden behind my walls of sorrow. But with every step, I felt the weight on my chest lighten, the fog in my mind lift. I visited the market for the first time in years. The colors overwhelmed me at first. The bright reds of tomatoes, the deep greens of leafy vegetables, the golden hues of fresh bread. People bustled around me, busy with their lives, but a few kind faces met mine with smiles. Small nods of recognition. It reminded me that I was not invisible. Tasha walked beside me that day, her arm ready if I faltered. We spoke of simple things, the ripeness of fruit, the scent of herbs, the changing of the seasons. But beneath those words was something more, a quiet promise that I was not alone on this new path. At home, I filled my small kitchen with the sense of baking bread and simmering soup. The house, once so silent, now felt warm again, alive with purpose. I invited a few women from the community center to share a meal. We sat together, breaking bread, sharing stories, finding comfort in each other's company. Each day brought new challenges, but also new joys. I learned to fix the broken hinge on my garden gate. I repainted the front steps. I planted bulbs that would bloom in the spring, a promise to myself that I intended to be here to see them. And at night, when the house grew quiet again, I no longer felt abandoned. I felt whole, not because I had filled the space left by Ronald and Lorna, but because I had filled it with my own strength, my own hope. The garden became more than just a patch of earth. It became a gathering place, a sanctuary. Neighbors I had barely known before stopped to admire the blooms, to ask for cuttings, to offer seeds of their own. Children came to help water the plants, their laughter filling the air like music I hadn't heard in so long. One afternoon, as I sat beneath the shade of the old oak at the edge of my yard, Tasha joined me with 2 cups of sweet tea. We watched as a group of children played tag among the rows of flowers. "You've changed this place, Miss Evelyn," she said softly. "And you've changed us too." Her words warmed me more than the sun ever could. I had not set out to change anything but myself, but perhaps that's how change always begins. The community center invited me to speak at one of their gatherings. I hesitated at first. What could I offer? What wisdom could I share? But Tasha encouraged me, and so I stood before that small group of women and told my truth. I spoke not of bitterness, but of resilience. Not of betrayal, but of finding purpose again. They listened, some with tears in their eyes, some with soft smiles of understanding. And in that room, I felt seen, not as a woman discarded by her family, but as a woman who had chosen to rise. Each evening, as dusk settled over my garden, I would sit quietly watching the day fade and the first stars appear. I would breathe deeply, the scent of earth and blossoms filling my lungs, and I would whisper a simple promise to myself: I will continue, I will grow, I will bloom. The more I gave to the garden, to the community, to myself, the less space there was for regret. I no longer sat by the window waiting for familiar faces to appear at my gate. Instead, I welcomed the new friendships, new routines, new joys I hadn't imagined when I first began this journey. The garden flourished beyond my wildest hopes. What began as a few pots on a windowsill grew into neat rows of vegetables, bursts of wildflowers, sturdy herbs that perfumed the breeze. The garden became a symbol of what was possible when you stop looking backward and choose instead to plant something for the future. I worked with the community center to start small classes, gardening for children, cooking on a budget for young families, sewing and mending for anyone who wished to learn. I watched women who had felt forgotten discover their own strengths, watched them lift each other as they grew. One afternoon, as the golden light of sunset bathed my small patch of earth, I stood with Tasha, surveying all we had built together. The laughter of children rang out as they chased butterflies, their faces bright with the wonder of small things. "You did this, Miss Evelyn," Tasha said, her voice filled with admiration. "No," I answered, my heart full. "We did this, all of us." And as the stars began to prick the darkening sky, I realized I had found what I thought I had lost forever. Not the love of my children, but the love of life itself. The night air carried the scent of jasmine and earth, and I breathed it in, ready, truly ready, for whatever would come next. The turning point came not in some grand gesture, but in the quiet certainty that I no longer feared my own solitude. The house that had once felt hollow now echoed with purpose. The clink of dishes as I prepared a simple meal, the soft hum of music as I worked in the garden, the sound of my own voice as I read aloud to no one but the plants and the breeze. The days unfolded gently. Each morning I rose with the sun, opened the curtains wide, and let the light in. I tended the garden, shared cuttings and harvests with neighbors, and welcomed anyone who wished to join me. Strangers became friends, friends became family. The ache in my chest that had once longed for Ronald and Lorna's voices grew quieter. It didn't vanish. I don't know if it ever will, but it no longer defined me. At the community center, I became known not just as a helper, but as a teacher, a guide. Young mothers came to me for advice on balancing work and home. Elderly neighbors asked for tips on container gardening. The center invited me to help lead a new program, Growing Together, a project to reclaim abandoned lots and turn them into shared green spaces. I said yes. On weekends, we gathered families, children, elders, people from all walks of life. We cleared debris, tilled soil, planted seeds, and as those gardens bloomed, so did the connections between us. I watched friendships blossom, watched people lift each other up, watched life return to places long neglected. Each evening, as I sat on my porch with a cup of tea, I felt something I hadn't in years: pride. Not in what I had given to those who took without thanks, but in what I was building now, with hands that still had strength, with a heart that still had love to give. The Growing Together project became more than just a way to beautify the neighborhood. It became a lifeline for many, including me. As we worked side by side, planting and tending, I listened to the stories of others who had known hardship, betrayal, and loss. Their words reminded me that I was not alone in my pain, nor in my desire to create something good from it. One afternoon, as I knelt in the soil planting marigolds along the edge of a new garden, a woman named Ruth shared her story. She too had been cast aside by her children, left to fend for herself when illness made her vulnerable. We worked in silence for a time, and then she said, "I thought I was the only one." I looked at her, my hands covered in earth, and said, "We never are. We only think we are because we don't speak it out loud." That moment forged a bond between us. One of many that grew as the gardens did. Tasha and I dreamed bigger. We talked of expanding the gardens into teaching spaces, of hosting workshops, of creating places where the community could gather to celebrate, to mourn, to heal. And through it all, my heart healed. I no longer measured my worth by Ronald and Lorna's absence. Their names still came to me in the quiet hours, but now they brought reflection, not anguish. I prayed for them, not with bitterness, but with hope. Hope that wherever they were, they might find the peace I was beginning to know. And each evening, as the last light of day touched the blooms I had planted with trembling hands and a wounded heart, I felt whole, not because I had erased the pain, but because I had grown something beautiful from it. The gardens became a symbol, not just for me, but for the entire neighborhood. What had once been empty lots filled with trash and weeds now bloomed with color and life. People who had barely exchanged nods on the street began to stop, to talk, to lend a hand. The project had started as a way for me to reclaim my sense of purpose, but it had grown into something far greater, a movement of healing, of connection, of hope. We held small gatherings among the rows of flowers and vegetables, community dinners where everyone brought what they could and left with full bellies and warmer hearts. Music drifted through the evening air, children played without fear, and neighbors shared laughter that had been missing for too long. One evening, as the stars blinked to life above us, Tasha sat beside me on the porch. "You've given this place a soul again, Miss Evelyn," she said softly. I looked at her, at the gardens we had built together, at the people who now filled my life, and I realized she was right. I had once thought I needed Ronald and Lorna to feel whole, but I had found wholeness in giving, in creating, in choosing to live with an open heart despite all that had been taken from me. That night, I wrote in my journal, "I am no longer waiting for what was lost. I am building what is new." And with that, I felt a peace I hadn't known in years, a peace that came not from forgetting, but from forgiving, and from choosing to bloom where I had been planted. Autumn arrived, and with it came a golden quiet that settled over the gardens and the community we had built. The leaves turned brilliant shades of red and orange, falling in soft drifts across the soil we had tended with such care. The harvest was plentiful. Baskets of squash, beans, tomatoes, herbs gathered and shared among neighbors like gifts of the earth itself. Each morning I stepped into the cool air with gratitude. My hands, once weak and trembling, worked with strength and purpose. The aches in my bones no longer reminded me of what I'd lost, but of all I had survived. The community center invited me to speak again, this time at a larger gathering. I stood before faces young and old, and I told them the truth, that I had once been broken, discarded, left to believe my story had ended, but that I had chosen with trembling hands and a weary heart to write a new chapter. I spoke of the gardens, of the friendships, of the small acts of kindness that had stitched me back together. And when I finished, the room rose in applause, not for the speech, but for what we had all built together. Later that week, a letter arrived, handwritten, the envelope worn at the edges. It was from Lorna. My heart raced as I unfolded the paper, as I read her words filled with regret, with longing, with the first fragile steps toward reconciliation. She wrote of seeing news of the gardens, of hearing from an old neighbor what I had done. She wrote of shame, of sorrow, of hope, that perhaps it was not too late. I sat with that letter in my lap for a long time, the autumn sun warming my face, and I wept. Not for what was lost, but for what might still be found. I carried Lorna's letter with me for days, folded neatly in my pocket, close to my heart. I read it over and over, each time finding new layers in her words, new cracks in the wall I'd built around my memories of her. The sorrow in her handwriting, the trembling hope that bled through each sentence, reached places in me I thought were closed forever. Tasha noticed the change in me. One evening, as we watched the last of the sun's light fade from the garden, she gently asked, "Will you write her back?" I sighed, staring out at the rows of plants preparing for their winter rest. "I don't know," I admitted. "Part of me wants to. Part of me is afraid." "Afraid of what?" she asked. "Of hoping," I whispered. But that night, beneath a sky heavy with stars, I sat at my kitchen table and began to write. The words came slowly at first, careful, measured. I spoke of the gardens, of the joy I'd found in the community, of the healing that had come, not in great leaps, but in small, steady steps. I spoke, too, of my pain, of the emptiness her absence had left, of the strength I'd had to find to fill that space myself. And finally, I wrote of forgiveness, not as a gift I offered lightly, but as a choice I made for my own peace. When the letter was done, I felt lighter. I sealed it, placed it by the door, and slept that night with a heart that felt, if not whole, at least open. The next morning, I mailed the letter. I stood on the porch for a long while after, watching the mail truck disappear down the road, carrying with it my words, my hope, my first step toward whatever came next. Winter came softly that year. The gardens, once bursting with color and life, settled into their quiet rest beneath blankets of fallen leaves and light frost. The community still gathered, now indoors, sharing warm meals, stories, and plans for the spring. The empty lots we'd filled with the green would soon bloom again, but for now they slept. And in that season of stillness, I too found rest. The letter I sent to Lorna bore fruit. Weeks after I mailed it, a reply came. Her words were halting, uncertain, but filled with longing. She spoke of mistakes, of nights spent wishing she had chosen differently, of wanting to see me if I would allow it. I read her letter in the quiet of my kitchen, the kettle whistling softly on the stove, and I wept, not for what had been, but for what might yet be. When the snow melted and the earth softened again, Lorna came. She walked up the path I'd swept clear with trembling steps, her eyes wide with emotion. We stood facing each other, two women shaped by sorrow and hope, and then without a word we embraced, not to erase the past, but to acknowledge it and to choose something different for the future. The days that followed were filled with cautious joy. Lorna helped in the garden, her hands learning the language of soil and seed. We spoke of small things at first, the weather, the work, but slowly the deeper conversations came. Apologies were offered, tears shared, forgiveness sought and given, imperfect but real. And as spring returned to the earth, it returned to my heart as well. The garden bloomed, and so did I. The days with Lorna unfolded gently, like the first buds of spring pushing through the soil. We did not rush to mend what had been broken. Instead, we tended to it carefully, the way we tended to the garden. There were awkward silences, moments when old wounds ached, but there was also laughter, soft at first, then freer, as we found new ways to be mother and daughter. Tasha watched our reconciliation with quiet joy. One afternoon, as Lorna and I worked side by side planting new roses along the garden's edge, Tasha said, "This place isn't just growing plants. It's growing hearts back together." Her words stayed with me. As the garden bloomed, so did the community spirit. More families joined our efforts. More children learned to plant and care for the earth. We held gatherings where stories were shared, music played, and meals were passed hand to hand. The gardens became a symbol of what could be rebuilt. Not just soil and seed, but trust, connection, hope. Ronald's absence still echoed in my heart, but I no longer let it define me. I prayed for him as I always had, but I no longer waited for his return to feel whole. I had found peace in the life I was building, in the hands that helped me shape it, in the roots that anchored me. Each evening, as the sun set over the garden, I stood among the blooms and whispered my thanks to the earth, to those who had stayed, to the strength I had found within myself. And I knew, at last, that I was no longer living in the shadow of what I had lost. I was living in the light of what I had chosen to grow. Summer brought with it a fullness of bloom, of life, of joy. The garden, once a fragile hope, had become a sanctuary. Every path was lined with color. Every breeze carried the scent of growth. Children's laughter rang through the air as they played among the flowers, their hands learning the feel of soil, their hearts learning the power of care. Lorna and I found our rhythm. We worked together with ease now, the silences between us no longer heavy with regret, but filled with quiet understanding. We spoke of plans for the garden, new beds, a small greenhouse, a space where neighbors could gather in rain or shine. One afternoon, as we shared tea on the porch, Lorna reached for my hand. "I don't deserve this," she said softly. "Your forgiveness. This chance." I squeezed her hand gently. "We all deserve the chance to do better, and you've taken it." Tasha and I marveled at how far we had all come. The garden had grown beyond us, drawing in the community, binding us together. We started a fund to support families in need, fueled by the harvest's bounty and the generosity of neighbors who once passed by without a glance. And as the season ripened, I felt something inside me settle. The ache for Ronald remained, but it no longer consumed me. I had chosen each day to sow kindness, to tend hope, to grow love where once there had been pain. In the quiet of the evenings, as the sky blushed with the day's end, I stood in my garden, the legacy I had chosen blooming around me, and I knew this was enough, more than enough. As summer gave way to autumn once more, the garden glowed with the richness of the harvest, the trees heavy with fruit, the beds full of vegetables, the air filled with the warm, earthy scent of leaves preparing to fall. Each day brought visitors, families gathering produce, neighbors stopping to share stories, children showing off the flowers they had tended with their own small hands. Lorna and I stood together often, watching it all. "Look what you built, Mama," she said one evening, as the sun dipped low and painted everything in gold. I shook my head gently. "What we built," I corrected. "None of this could have happened without the hands and hearts that came together to make it." Tasha, too, had grown through the seasons. She had enrolled in school, taking steps toward her dream of opening a cafe. She still came to the garden, her laughter filling the air, her spirit lifting all of ours. And me, I had found peace. Not because the past had been forgotten or the scars erased, but because I had chosen each day to plant new seeds of kindness, of forgiveness, of hope. I had chosen to see what could bloom even after so much had been lost. The garden would outlive me. I knew that. The community we had built, the friendships we had sown, these would continue, tended by the hands that had joined mine in the soil. On the last warm evening of autumn, as the stars began to scatter across the sky, I stood in the heart of that garden and whispered my final promise. I have done what I could, and it is enough.